Hey, this is Ike. I'm continuing my progression through the limit series today with a 50-cent dollar 6-max video. I'm just going to be playing and talking about the hands as they come up and the differences between this game and smaller stakes games. That raise against the short stack limper is a bit close with the queen jack suited, but I think it's right. If he were limping tight there, it would definitely not be so good, but if he's limping pretty loose, it is. And based on the fact that he limped, it's probably more likely that he's limping loose than that he's limping pretty tight. So, I flop overs to the board on a fairly coordinated board. I'm just going to bet fold here. If he calls, I would probably shove any turn that gave me a gut shot, a flush or a flush draw or a pair, and probably an ace, and would probably check fold other turns, anything that paired the board, a third diamond, probably check fold. So yeah, but as it worked out, I raised, I c-bet the flop, and I took it down. So that's at least carrying over from one limit to the next. When people limp, you can raise them and c-bet the flop and take it down a lot. And that's, in my experience, true all the way up to the highest stakes. People who limp pre-flop in 6-max games are making a mistake to be limping, and they generally compound that mistake by limping too loose and playing too passive post-flop. So, keep attacking the limpers. And I'm going to cold call this king 10 suited. It's pretty close. Folding it wouldn't be awful, but against an unknown, I think 2 suited broadways is a cold call in that spot. I flop top pair. I call a c-bet. I don't really like raising there. I don't see myself getting it in against worst very often if I do. And it's certainly awful as a bluff. Oh, now I turn the nuts. Not the nuts, I lose to quads, but basically the nuts. And the only real decision is how big to bet to maximize my value here. And I bet a bit more than half pot on turn, like 2/3 pot really. And I'm betting 2/3 pot again here on the river. It's tough to say what the best way to get value is. Against some opponents that I know, I would try to get the whole stack in there. Against others, I might go so far as to check back the turn and only try to get one street of value in on the river. It really depends on the player and your history with them, how much you can get paid off there. The main hand that's paying off is ace high, though sometimes he'll have the worst full house. The worst full house you can get a lot more value against in general. And a decent amount of the time he has a pocket pair 9s through aces. And I don't know, all things considered against an unknown, I think going 2/3 there is the way to go. He's telling me in the chat he folded queen queen and that I made a nice play. Who knows if he's telling the truth? People tell the truth more than you would expect him to. He probably is. Anyway, I flopped the trips with the king 10 after raising the button limper there. I'm going to fire it out and hope he raises me or something. 3-betting that min raise from the 40 big blind stack with the ace-6 suited. Calling there would definitely have been okay too, but I like 3-betting. And I flopped bottom pair. I'm not really going to try and play it as a bluff. I'm just going to check it back and maybe put a value bet on the river. When he bets here, it seems likely enough to me that I'm ahead that I'm going to end up calling. I only need to be right a little less than a third of the time. I'm getting better than 2-1. And it's totally believable for him to have, you know, king 10, king jack, jack 10, ace anything. Betting ace high there seems like a mistake, but it's not one that I would necessarily rule out some random player making. Though most likely he would be bluffing with king 10, king jack, jack 10. Gonna go ahead and c-bet the queen 10 on that board. That's actually a pretty good board against a small blind caller. Small blind callers tend to have medium pocket pairs, which are in bad shape on that board. Like, well, obviously, sets and quads are in good shape on that board, but 7s, 6s, and 5s are not. And in addition to medium pairs, they tend to have 2 Broadway hands. And other than Queen 10, Jack 10, Queen Jack, Jack 10, Queen 10, those hands are not doing well on that board. King Jack, and so forth. Obviously, I'm delighted to be stacking off with the kings against that guy. He had jacks. He by no means made a mistake there. Ran jacks into kings, he loses. That queen 5 suited call of the raise small to big is... I make that call pretty much every time, unless I decide to 3-bet it. I don't fold there. But it's definitely toward the very bottom of my range. Queen 4 suited even, I'm folding a decent amount. And then calling the flop bet is standard. Whether or not to bet when check 2 on the turn is a bit tricky. I decided to bet, hoping he would call me with ace high, thinking that by betting I reduce the chance I have to put myself in a hard spot on the river by playing against his bet, and also I might get a street of value out of the ace high that also has the gut shot to the wheel. Now, I check-shoved this ace 6 up here on the top right. I'm not bluffing. I don't expect him to fold a better hand ever. I didn't want to bet into that guy and the other player on that board. I thought that that would probably not show a profit, because I'm never getting either of them off a better hand, really. And there are a lot of better hands, and I might get called in 2 places by various draws, be in a tough spot on later streets. So I decided to check it. If it gets checked through and the turn comes off something safe, I might try to show down my top pair. If the button bets and the other guy calls, I can pretty happily just fold my hand. And if the button bets and the other guy folds, I can go with it. So by checking it there and letting the button bet before I make it, and the second player act before I make a decision, I let myself act on a little bit more information than I would be if I was just betting out there. So, I like how I played that hand. This ace-jack here, I get min-raised, and it feels kind of like a bluff to me, so I decided to go with my ace-high here. The speed of the min-raise and the fact that he limped from the small blind and is then min-raising this flop, there just aren't that many hands that limp from the small blind and are in good shape here. It's like the bottom 2 sets, King, Queen, King, Jack, are really the only hands I see him raising for value. But sure enough, he had King, Jack. But I think it's going to be like a flush draw, or like Ace Deuce, Ace 4, or even some totally random bluff a lot of the time there. And I'm going to take it down by shoving the flop. Or it'll be a flush draw and I'll get called when I shove the flop. But getting it in against a flush draw there is good news. I'm happy for that to happen. So, sure looked pretty stupid to 3-bet all in with ace high there and get shown top pair, but I'm actually happy with how I played that hand. Three-betting the queen jack against the cutoff open. I do that when I've got queen jack in the small blind against a cutoff or button open. I 3-bet it almost every time. Against very tight players, I fold it. I pretty much never call there. Calling there is pretty ugly because the big blind can either call or re-raise behind you, and in either case you're in an unappealing spot. Pretty good board to c-bet with my 4-5 there. Misses everything except an ace and a flush draw, and I have a gut shot if I do get called, so standard hand, c-bet, take it down. It's tempting to find try and find a way to play that Jack 7 suited, either limp it in or raise it, because there's a poster and there's an under-the-gun short-stacked limper. They probably have... The poster has a random hand, the short-stack under-the-gun limper probably has a bad one, but there's just so much money already in the pot there that I'm worried that if I open it, I'm going to get called or re-raised by somebody, and need to have a bit more of a hand there to do anything, because I'm so likely to see a flop with one bet left to play against a short stack or something like that. These games have really seemed to be playing a lot more aggressive pre-flop than either the 10 cent, 25 cent, or the 25 cent, 50 cent ones. It's been raised to me a lot more often than it's been limped to me, whereas the opposite was certainly true at 10 cent, 25 cent, and it was about even mixture, 25, 50. So that's such a dry board, and so good for the under-the-gun raiser's range relative to the caller's ranges, because I'm likely to... My range is heavily weighted towards good aces, and theirs are heavily weighted towards middle-suited connectors and mid-pairs and stuff like that. So I just continuation bet and take it down. Obviously re-raise ace-king against the min-raise and the cold call. I get min-raised back, and I'm just going to stick it in here. I don't really see any other play. I'm not terribly worried that he has me beat. Obviously, I wouldn't be surprised to see aces or kings. I also wouldn't be surprised to see ace-queen, ace-jack, any sort of pair at all. And yeah, my ace-king high was good there. So I float the flop bet with 10-9 there with my gut shot. It was kind of small bet. Follow up with a biggish bet on the turn here when he checks it to me. The flush card got there, so it's good news for me. Thinks for a little bit, calls. I have a bad feeling about this spot that on like bet of 16 or so here is going to get called by something like king-jack or maybe ace-jack with ace-10 with the ace of clubs. So I'm thinking about it, thinking maybe I'm going to check it back, or maybe I'll bet double pot. My range really isn't going to be balanced when I do this here, but against a relative unknown, it doesn't matter so much that my range isn't balanced. I think that he very rarely has better than a one-pair hand here, and he's just not going to suck it up and call with a one-pair hand against an overbet there. So I went ahead and overbet it. Now, I really have to be right every time with that kind of play. I have to take it down more than 2/3 of the time for my bet to be correct. But I really think I'm right more than 90% of the time that he has a one-pair hand there. And then on top of that, I think that he is going to fold it just about every time. So I'm happy with my bet. I think it was a good decision to bet there. A creative way to win a pot that I wouldn't have been able to win otherwise. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but when people lead into you in spots like this, especially for less than a large bet, but even if it were a larger bet, when people lead into you in spots where they'd expect you to bet if they checked, they almost never have it. So I just go ahead and raise and take it down. Nothing happened for a couple minutes there, so I just decided to go ahead and edit it out. Now I've got a couple hands here. Opening the queen-6 suited in the cutoff there is definitely a bit on the loose side, but everybody behind me has a medium stack, which tends to indicate weak and passive players. An actual short stack might be shoving a lot pre-flop. Almost all pros have play with full stacks, so I decided to mix it up not really mix it up. I'm gonna open that every time in exactly this spot, but to make a bit of a loose open, because I think all the players behind me are probably pretty mediocre. And got 2 callers, board came awful, so I just checked it through on the flop and the turn. I picked up a big draw on the turn. I was going to check shove if the button bet the turn, but as it was, flop and turn got checked through. I rivered my flush and put in a little value raise against his bet on the river there. And I would guess that he just had nothing, because he didn't even think about calling for a second. Now his ace-10 hand, I raised, I got called by the small blind, I checked back the flop. On the turn I turned to flush draw, he bet, I called. The only real, well, I could have bet the flop, but it makes a lot of sense not to. Because I'm never really folding out better hands, I'm just folding out things like King Jack and stuff that will... It's a bit of a win to get those hands to fold in that you deny them the opportunity to catch up, but you also have the opportunity to check it back and induce bluffs and call down profitably. So, on the whole, I think checking back with the ace-10 high there on that board is a good decision. Then when I turned the flush draw, and the board stayed all unscary low cards, I thought it was an easy call. And then on the river, a 1-card straight got there, but it's not a card he's very likely to have unless he had pocket 4s. I guess ace-4 suited, but the guy seemed pretty reasonable and called from the small blind. Has seemed pretty reasonable so far in the session and called from the small blind. So he probably has a range of medium pairs and medium high card hands and not much else. So if he's betting the medium high card hands, things like King Jack, as bluffs on both the turn and river a decent percentage of the time, and I see no reason to think he wouldn't be, then my calling down with ace high there is correct. As it was, he had jacks, I lose, but I'm really losing to like pocket pairs and nothing else there, and beating all of his high card hands. It's a question of how often he bets the high card hands, and there's really no way for me to know at the point that I'm making the decision, but in general, against most people, they're betting the high card hands enough that it's a call there, I think. This Jack-10, he tanked for a while and then checked it to me on the flop, which is pretty weird. Definitely gave some consideration to checking it back, but then I decided that his think for a while check was likely to indicate bad ace or good king, something that he was not excited about getting his stack in with, but that had some showdown value, and was trying to play some pot control by checking it. So I was going to bet flop, and bet big on turn, and shove the river, no matter what came. If he had check-called flop, I was going to try and blow him off whatever he was pot controlling with. But then when he decided to check-raise, I just decided to let it go. I thought that maybe he had some sort of huge hand. Maybe he had some sort of draw that he was going to be willing to go with, unless I, like, overbet shoved against that check-raise, which seems pretty gross. Because I do think bluffs are a decent amount of his hands, I can't just call for the implied odds on hitting my gut shot, even though that does look tempting. And yeah, I just didn't see any way to profitably continue with the hand once I got check-raised. This ace-5 hand is a kind of goofy but not too interesting spot. I mean, I'm basically the nuts here. I can't see how he would ever take this line with a 6, so I'm deciding to just min-raise it here and hope he bluff shoves on me, or calls with worse, if he's somehow gotten to this point with worse. But yeah, I was expecting to chop there more than 90% of the time. But I think min-raising the river gives him the most chance to do something stupid and lose more money if he does happen to have a bad hand there. I thought for a second about flatting these aces against this guy because he's tight, and he was talking trash to me in the chat after that jacks against ace-10 hand, and maybe he's primed to spew against me if I take a bluffy line post-flop after flatting the aces pre, but also because he's tight when he opens there, if he's opening 9% of his hands under the gun, which is believable if he's 17-9 overall, then fully a third of the time he has jacks plus ace-king. And he's going to stack those off against me. So I'm missing the opportunity to get stacks in pre-flop up to a third of the time by not re-raising there, and I don't think I can afford to do that. I don't think I'm going to get the money in some clever way post-flop often enough to make up for it. So I got flatted by Justin 21-21-21 again. Small against my button open. Checked it back on a pretty bad flop. Now I've turned a gut shot, and I decide to bet it. I don't know. I could have just checked it back again here. I think he has a medium pair a lot here, or I think he bets as a bluff. If he has something like king-jack there, it would make sense for him to. But I think he has medium pair a ton, so I decided to bet, hoping he would fold it. And I'd been thinking I would follow through again on the river, but something about his timing on the turn call, combined with the river being just about the worst card to continue the bluff on, because why would I ever bet an 8 on the turn? I decided to just check it back and give up. I think it was the right choice to check it back and give up. I think he was calling again with the 7s there. Though, when I originally decided to bet the turn to bluff him off medium pair, I was actually thinking I was going to fire 2 barrels. The river card combined with the timing actually made a big difference to me there. I can't quite put my finger on what it was about it. It was just not quite an instant call. It was like he didn't have to think about it, but he wasn't like jamming his finger on the button. I don't know, it really felt like a bad spot to continue the bluff. And stacking those jacks off pre-flop against the button open, totally standard, happy to be getting it in. Oh, speaking of stacking off pre-flop, I went back to Poker Tracker and looked up what that guy had when my ace-king high won. He had min 4-bet and called the 5-bet with queen-8 suited. So never rule out the complete spaz factor, especially against an unknown player. If you were at all considering doing anything other than getting it in with ace-king in a spot like that, get it in with ace-king and let him find a way to make a mistake. So I've got this middle pair here, and he keeps min-betting. I don't see any reason to raise. I certainly don't see any reason to fold. Min-bets again on the end. Still no reason to raise, no reason to fold. And yeah, he has a worse middle pair, and I win. So I can't think of any good reason to have done anything else on any street there. It feels weird to just call 3 min-bet barrels ever with anything, but can't think of anything else to do with that hand, and it worked out pretty well. With this ace-queen 3-bet here, in general, when I 3-bet ace-queen in a spot like this, if I get 4-bet, there's a good chance I'm folding. Specifically against Justin, though, because I 3-bet him last orbit, and because he talked trash in chat about how he owns me, I'd expect him to play back a little bit lighter there, maybe, and I would, in fact, be planning on 5-betting all in if he 3-bets small, or calling if he overbet shoves. As it is, he folded and the other guy called, which is a great spot, especially now that I flopped top pair, and trying to get the stack in here. There are a few different options. I can bet small on the flop and try and go 3 barrels, or I can bet big on the flop. I decided to bet big on the flop because I was hoping that by doing so I would manipulate the pot size such that he would think he had a good shove with a flopped gut shot or something with, you know, queen 10, queen jack, jack 10, or even some garbage hand. I was hoping that with the large bet there I would make it look attractive for him to bluff shove. Since I think I'm probably going to stack a worse ace there most of the time, regardless of the line I take, I decided on that line because I thought it increased my chance of getting the money in against total air. And this 10-8 up here is going to be the last hand of the video. Decided to c-bet this flop. Sort of in some ways it's a strange choice to c-bet there because I flopped second pair on a totally dry ace-high board, and I'm never really folding out better hands, or even hands that are drawing all that live on the flop. But on that board, I very rarely have anything to be semi-bluffing with, other than, 9-7, 7-6. It's basically it. So by turning my second pair, especially since it happens to have a flush draw, a backdoor flush draw here, into a semi-bluffing hand, I have something to three-barrel bluff with on this board so that I can, balance out the very strong hands that I'm going to be three-barreling for value, the good aces mainly. I think that it's good to do that so that you can have some draws to trips in your range and to two-pair in your range when you're betting on this board, but not for value. It's hard to find good hands to semi-bluff with on ace-8-5 rainbow, and I think that 10-8 actually qualifies as a pretty good one here, and I'm just going to fire 3 streets with it and try and get him off a bad ace in this case, but of course in the actual hand I took it down on the flop. So anyway, video's over. Thanks for watching. The jump from 25-cent, 50-cent to 50-cent dollar was definitely a big one. The play was a lot tougher here, and pre-flop play in particular is starting to converge a bit more towards the textbook correct pre-flop play, where people are, raising a lot more often than they're open calling, and playing between 20 and 30% of their hands in a 6-max game. And the post-flop play is getting a bit more aggressive. People are definitely still a bit too check-call-y. Definitely don't put in enough raises post-flop, but a lot tougher than 25-cent, 50-cent. And a bigger jump than 10-cent, 25-cent, 25.50 was at that. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Good luck in all your games.